Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in.
It is Kate and PozzA here in the second race of our first triple header. Before we jump into reviewing the racing at the beautiful Mandalika circuit and the carnage it caused with its many incidents, we have some rumours and news to catch up on. And first off the block is the rumour that Scott Ogden may be departing MLAV Racing and going to another Moto3 team, so staying in the paddock. This came as quite a big surprise for me, but what did you think about it?
It doesn't really surprise me that much, just based on the fact that the MLAV team have sort of been one of the not backmarker teams, but one of the teams that sort of hang around the back in the Moto3 field. And obviously, Ogden's been in that team for 2-3 years at this point, so it doesn't really surprise me that he wants to try and find his place at a better team. Just with the fact that they're on Hondas as well, they haven't been the best bike recently. There are apparently some updates coming sooner or later, but yeah, I'm not really shocked that that's a bit of news.
Hopefully, the updates do really help them, although they were competitive at the weekend just been. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. The other news in the rider market that I'm very excited for is the fact that Darryn Binder is moving over to Gresini Racing in essentially a seat swap with Manu Gonzalez. And I'm excited to see what they can both do in their new teams. But obviously, being a rubbing his racing fan, this Darryn Binder staying in Moto2 is really exciting to me.
Yeah, I've been a Darren Binder fan for quite a few years now, so I'm also quite happy that he's managed to keep a seat on the grid for next year. I feel like he's been a lot better this year than people have really given him credit for. There's been a few races where he's been sort of up and around the top five, top six. Last race was one of them. He just hasn't been able to really capitalize on it. And I'm excited to see what Gonzalez can do as well. Not really going to a better team, I wouldn't say, but still a strong team that I feel like he can be competitive in.
Now, talking about the weekend, we had a few injuries before the racing even started. We had a couple of big fallers. The first one being Miguel Oliveira, who has multiple fractures in his wrist after a nasty high side that was caused by an electrical issue. In Moto3, we had poor Eddie O'Shea, who picked up a broken hand after a qualifying crash, and that was his very first Grand Prix race weekend. And I think it's safe to say they're both going to be ruled out of Japan. But my question to you is, do you think that this these injuries will plague these riders for the rest of the year?
Presuming they are able to get back on the bike this year, then yeah, I feel like it will. But I feel like with how many races are left and how sort of congested they are, it might be best for them to just sort of try and focus on testing and next year. It's a shame for both of them, mainly for Eddie O'Shea, just because it was his first race weekend and he was doing like quite well for his first time in the World Championship. But yeah, it's a shame for both of them, but hoping they can come back stronger.
On to the actual races, because as we mentioned earlier, it was pretty much a war of attrition. It was dirty offline, and that saw a lot of fallers. And while we don't have time to cover all of the fallers, all would be here till, you know, Japan actually started. One incident that I do want to mention occurred in Moto3 practice too. It saw Danny Holgado crash right in front of his teammate Ralston, and Ralston had absolutely nowhere to go but over the top of Holgado. Fortunately, both of them are all right, but it was just super scary. The race itself saw Alonso pulling his old tricks that PozzA has an excellent way of calling during the race. He's like, Alonso's just going to do Alonso things. But he was battling in the pack before coming to the front for the win. Adrian Fernandez got P2, his debut podium, and David Munoz pulled some aggressive moves to ride home in third place. What were your thoughts on this race?
I thought it was a really good race from start to finish. As you mentioned, sort of probably about a quarter of the way into the race, the commentators were saying, "Oh, it's not been a good start for David Alonso. He's dropping back through the field." And I thought he does this essentially every week, where he'll just sort of sit at the back of the group, and then with sort of like 5 laps to go, he'll storm through to just short of the podium, and then obviously in the last 5 laps he'll storm straight through for the win, which he's done many times this year. This one was one of them as well. Yeah, I thought it was a good race. Adrian Fernandez as well, getting his first podium in Moto3 after quite a bit of a wait, which was nice to see. And David Munoz was in third. I feel like it's always sort of nice to see how Munoz isn't really happy with third. Like, it's clear that he wants to win, but it's also been nice to see that he hasn't been taking riders out in the meantime. Just going over some of the rookies as well. In the Moto3 class, Angel Piqueras was again top rookie in P4, but he had Luca Lanetta right behind him in P5 as well, and Joel Esteban was the only other rookie in the points in P14.
One other rookie I do want to mention is Ralston. Again, I think a lot of his weekend was sort of ruined by that crash because it took him out of getting into Q2 directly, and I think it probably would have shaken him a bit. So it's definitely a shame for him, and hopefully he'll be back in the points in Japan. Moto3 wasn't the only one with scary incidents. Moto2 definitely had some. Jaume Masia had a particularly nasty high side, and Somkiat Chantra got his leg clipped by Fermin Aldeguer when he was doing the doctor leg dangle. That terrified me. And I always worry that it's going to happen when they're dangling their leg. But both riders thankfully have been declared fit, but I imagine they'll be sporting some serious bruising heading to Japan. That being said, I think my rider of the day has got to go to third place, Alonso Lopez, just because he pulled off like stunning defensive maneuvers to hold off so many riders. Second place went to championship leader Aldeguer, and in a class of his own is podcast favorite. I get to say that because I can. 6 seconds up the road was Aaron Canet. Stunning, stunning ride by him, and quite reminiscent of the way he got his first win. He was so dominant in the race when he got his first and second win. But enough of my Canet fangirling. What did you think?
Yeah, again, another good race. I thought this one was more sort of in the like middle of the points, I'd say. There was some good battles for I think sort of like sixth, seventh going on throughout the whole race, and obviously the podium battle laid on between I think it was Lopez, Aldeguer, and there was probably one more, but I can't really think of it right now. Yeah, it was entertaining. One of the riders that I want to bring attention to, just because obviously I like my rookies, was Dennis Onchu. Obviously, just because he was the only rookie in the points, and some of the moves that he was pulling on some of like the more experienced riders like Joe Roberts was just really nice to see. Rookie being able to be that sort of confident on the bike this early.
And another rider that we do probably have to mention is Eisen Guevara, because he had his best result of the season, but he was disqualified from the race due to being underweight. So definitely not the weekend he would have wanted, and hopefully he can get some good results and not be underweight at the next one out. Moving on to MotoGP, we had a surprisingly strong showing from the Japanese manufacturers this weekend, with both Johann Zarco and Fabio Quartararo qualifying in the top 10, which is awesome to see. The sprint saw Jorge Martin do a Pecco Bagnaia and bottle it on a Saturday for a change, and the podium was Marc Marquez in P3, Enea Bastianini in P2, and Pecco Bagnaia in first. This meant we came into Sunday's race with Martin only 12 points in the lead, and I was ridiculously nervous because obviously Martin bottled it. But what did you think of the race, and particularly Martin crashing out of the lead?
Yeah, it was really unexpected, and that's something that Martin himself sort of said as well. Just the fact that he said, "Oh, some of the crashes that I'm having, I don't exactly know why," is probably a bit concerning. But he made up for it in the main race, which is the more important thing, I'd say. Apart from that, can't really remember much else from the sprint as always. Uh, don't remember it being too boring, which is always good. Yeah, apart from that, not really much else.
Yeah, I think that happens because we get the Sunday race. And I think the only reason I ever have anything to talk about is because I make notes for this podcast to actually, you know, if I'm like, oh, I need to mention this. But Martin crashing out was probably the main thing to remember. The Grand Prix, however, saw only 12 riders cross the finish line after Jack Miller went bowling into turn one, taking himself out, along with Alicia Spargo, Luca Marini, and Alex Marquez. Mechanicals fell the way of Augusto Fernandez and Marc Marquez, with the latter's bike catching fire while he was still on it and just riding like normal. So that'd be very interesting to find out what happened there. Now, multiple crashes occurred as well, but clearly Enea Bastianini has been studying Pecco and Jorge's data a bit too much because he was the rider to crash out of podium position this weekend. Pecco Bagnaia crossed the line in third place, rookie Pedro Acosta picked up an impressive second place, and Jorge Martin recovered from his stumble on Saturday to finish on the top step. I'm curious as to what you thought of the whole race, but my question is, what was your moment of the Grand Prix?
Yeah, there was a lot to cover in this race with all of the DNFs and whatnot. You had to force me to pick a moment with no preparation, so I'm just going to say Pedro Acosta getting that podium and hopefully not losing it because of the tire pressure sort of investigation that was put over him after the race. Yeah, it was a strong showing from Martin as well. Every time Pedro looked like he was gaining on him, Martin would just like find a way to respond immediately, which was extremely impressive. And even towards sort of the end of the race, when you could see Acosta just sort of backed off and took the second, Martin was still setting some red sectors. That was a really impressive ride from a couple of the riders.
I definitely think I shared that question in my notes, but I've just been looking through the chat and maybe I didn't, so my bad. Anyway, that's the racing, and we're going to move on to our predictions. So I'll start with Moto3. I have gone with Danny Holgado in P3, Ivan Ortola in P2, and David Alonso in P1, with my favourite, Nepa, as my reserve.
Okay, for my Moto3 predictions, it hasn't really changed a lot, but just a little switch up. Not one I don't think many of you would have expected coming from me, but I have locked in obviously David Alonso as my P1, Colin Vire as my P2. I know he did crash out last race, but I beg he'll get a podium. I've actually put Angel Piqueras in P3. He's had really solid runs, and I feel like he can just get a podium. Like it's very very likely. And then as my reserve, I have Daniel Holgado. The guy is solid. I feel like he can get some good points if something tragic does happen.
Yeah, I've gone extremely similar to what you've done and what I always do, but I feel like I sort of have enough of a lead to sort of play it safe. So in P3, I've gone for Colin Vire. Unfortunately, crashed out of the lead in the last race, but I feel like he'll be able to recover to get on the podium. I've gone Ivan Ortola in P2, just on the basis that I think he can avoid the long lap penalties this week and put in a strong result. And obviously, I've gone David Alonso in P1 just because it's always extremely difficult to bet against him. And if he does end up winning this race, he'll take the World Championship with him as well. So I feel like there's a bit of an extra incentive for him to win. And as my reserve, I've gone Danny Holgado, just because he hasn't looked extremely strong, mainly in this race because of the crash he had with his teammate, which was probably affecting him a bit. But he was also strong at this track last year. I think just missing out on second on the line. So I feel like he'll be up there.
My Moto2 has changed a little bit, maybe for the worse, but we'll see. In P1, I have Chelsea Vietti. P2, I have Aaron Canna. P3, I have Aigura, and as my reserve, I have Fermin Aldeguer. I think it's solid. I think it's like it's reasonable enough. Like it's not bad, but it's not like defining, I'd say.
Moving on to Moto2, I have gone for Aaron Canet in P3. He's been on a strong run recently. I don't feel like he'll be able to make it back-to-back victories, but he's been strong at this track in the past, so it is a possibility. In second, I've gone Jake Dixon, just because he's been off it the last few races, so I feel like he'll want to sort of put together a strong late run, just for a bit of self-confidence. And in P1, I've gone Aigura to win his home race. He's looked quite strong recently, and looks like he's essentially clear to win the title as well. And as my reserve, I've gone for Alonso Lopez, just because he's also been in good form lately.
Pretty similar to me. Actually, no, it's not similar at all. I don't know why I said that. My reserve, I put Aaron Canet. P3, I put Alonso Lopez, purely because of some of the things he was saying post race as well, saying that he quite likes Motegi and he feels like he can be strong there. So I'm hopeful. P2, I put Tony Abellino. I know he wasn't great here last year, but he lost his form at the end of the season last year, whereas now he's gained it at the end of the season, so I'm hoping that counts for something. And in P1, same as you, I have gone with Aigura. It's his home race. He's super strong at the moment. I think he's the rider to bet against. For the sprint, MotoGP sprint, I have Pedro Acosta in P3. I have Enea Bastianini in P2, and I have Pecco Bagnaia in. Sorry, I'm going to start that again because I lost what I was saying. For the MotoGP sprint, I have Pedro Acosta as my reserve, Enea Bastianini as P3, Pecco Bagnaia as P2, and Jorge Martin as taking the top step. Because even though he crashed this weekend, I still think he's just a sprint merchant, isn't he?
Yeah, you've summed it up extremely well there. But in my sprint, I've gone for Enea Bastianini in third. Just been looking strong recently. That's pretty much all I have to go on. P2, I've gone Marc Marquez, just because he'd have the most experience at this track. Obviously, he has the most experience at pretty much every track, apart from Aleix Espargaro. But some of the newer riders only came here for the first time in like 2022. And he was strong here on a Honda last year, even if it was in the wet. So I feel like he'll be up there. And to win, I've gone Jorge Martin, just because sprint merchant, hard to bet against him. And I've gone for Pecco Bagnaia in fourth, just because I believe he hasn't been extremely strong in the sprints in parts of this year. And for some reason, I just have the feeling that that'll continue.
My sprint podium, as always, does not change. Martin, Bagnaia, Marquez. My reserve has changed to Marco Bezzecchi, but that's only because I'm a little bit delusional and I feel like you can actually get some good points going.
Moving on to the main race, I've gone for the same four riders, just in a very slightly different combination. I've gone Enea Bastianini in third again, just because the GP24s have been kind of dominant this year compared to every other make of bike. I've gone for Bagnaia in second for essentially the same reason, and the fact that he's been better in the main races this year. And I've gone Jorge Martin to win, just because I kind of want him to win the title, and he's been looking very strong lately. So again, I feel like it's hard to bet against him. And as my reserve, I've gone Marc Marquez.
MotoGP race, I have Bagnaia, Martin Bastianini, and as my reserve, I also have Marco Bezzecchi, just because he had those couple of good results. Now I feel like he can take on the world, so a little bit of copium, but why not? Why not?
I've gone slightly similar. Well, very similar thinking about it. Our P1 and P2 are the same. I've got Martin in P1. He won here last year. I know it was a bit of an odd race because we got the red flag, but, well, 2 red flags, or it might even have been 3 red flags. It was a very odd race. P2, I've gone Pecco Bagnaia, and P3, I'm betting on Pedro Acosta. The KTM was good here last year. I'm hoping that that's the case this year because I need to claw back some points desperately. And for my reserve, I've gone Binder. The reason I say I need to claw back some points desperately is because I am currently sitting in last place on 252.5 points. Kelly's in second place on 287.5 points. But PozzA, you're doing a David Alonso. You might actually take this championship before their final race because you are so insanely in the lead. You're at 329.5 points. That is it from us. We want to know if you have any moments of the Grand Prix that we missed. We'll be here covering the Japanese Grand Prix and trying to wind down from the triple header next week. But for now, have a wonderful week.